Good evening. Welcome to the BBC News at 5. I'm Jane Hill. Our main story tonight, pressure continues to mount on the former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson to apologise for the newspaper column in which he wrote that Muslim women who wear a full-face veil look like letterboxes or bank robbers. Some colleagues say he should have the Tory whip removed, although sources close to Mr Johnson say it's important that difficult issues are debated. In a moment, I'll be discussing his comments with two Muslim women. But first, this report from our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
What Muslim women choose to wear in public can be a sensitive subject, guaranteed to provoke debate, and one on which Boris Johnson has made his views clear. But his language has prompted criticism from his opponents, the Prime Minister, and other senior Conservatives who say he went too far and should apologise.
It seems to me that what Boris might want to do now is consider whether some of the language that he used was inappropriate, and if he chooses to apologise, I'm no doubt that will be welcomed. But I don't think we should take from this incident that people are prohibited from discussing this subject. It's a perfectly legitimate subject for debate, but it's one of those subjects, and there are many of them in politics, where politicians should be careful about the language that they use.
Writing in the Daily Telegraph on Monday, Boris Johnson said a total ban on full-face coverings was not the answer. But he said that schools should be able to tell students to remove burqas if they turn up looking like a bank robber. He added that it was absolutely ridiculous that people should choose to go around looking like letterboxes. For this Muslim former Conservative parliamentary candidate, his words were inflammatory.
What bigotry like this is doing, what you do not understand it's doing, it's making people politicise religion. It's making people want to be seen as visibly Muslim, because the politics is becoming so sort of against Muslim people in this country. There's 3 million British Muslims in this country, and we are being ostracised at this point. The Conservative Party really should know better.
A source close to the former Foreign Secretary said he stood by his comments and failing to speak up for liberal values gave ground to extremists. Mr Johnson's supporters say he should not and will not say sorry.
We've gone down a route, a sort of PC route, where for political figures to say anything that causes offence to anyone has been considered to be an outrage. And we finished up with a political class of people who Joe Public can't even recognise, because none of them ever say anything memorable at all.
In Greater Manchester there was support and some concern.
I understand probably what he's trying to say, because it can feel a little threatening and things like that, but no, the language probably isn't the right thing to say.
He is a bit controversial, and what he says doesn't really resonate with anything that I believe in, so I pretty much ignore him.
Everyone's got their own rights to know what they want to wear. We don't pull anybody else up for what they're wearing.
In the context of an increase in Islamophobia and claims that the Tories have not done enough to tackle anti-Muslim prejudice internally, Boris Johnson's comments were guaranteed to make an impact. Jonathan Blake, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, in just a moment, I'll talk to one British Muslim woman who chooses not to wear a veil. First, let's talk to Sahar Al-Fafi. She is a geneticist by training who campaigns against Islamophobia, and she joins me from our studios in Cardiff. A very good evening to you.
Good evening to you. Thank you for having me.
What did you think when you first heard these comments from Boris Johnson?
I think Boris Johnson's comments are Islamophobic and racist, offensive and insulting, because he is dehumanising Muslim-veiled women and also criminalising them, creating an environment of suspicion. We already face triple discrimination against faith, against race, against our gender, and now we have a high-profile politician using an abusive language, making it worse for us and making it difficult. Without a doubt, it will make our life much more difficult, and it will lead to rise in Islamophobic abuse.
I mean, is that something that you suffer ordinarily anyway, before this particular article was written?
I mean, definitely. I mean, I lost count of how many Islamophobic abuse I have faced, and it has increased already after Brexit. And now with Boris Johnson, I'm not expecting for this abuse to be reduced at all. One of the incidents that I have faced, it was in the hospital where I used to work, when someone tried to steal a bike from the hospital site, and I attempted to stop them, and straight away they said, "You're an effing terrorist, go back to your country." And it's very painful, because Wales is part of me and I am part of Wales. And when someone tells me, go back to your country, where do I go? And luckily, one of my lab colleagues passed by at that moment and she supported me. And this is what Britain is all about, is that even if you disagree with my choice, you cannot superimpose your views on me or anyone else, and we celebrate our diversity and multiculturalism.
I mean, there are elements of what he wrote in his article that have been widely criticised there. You'll have heard that lots and lots of people within his own party saying he must apologise, and we all know what those particular sentences were. I'm curious whether you think there are any elements in the whole article that carried any validity, because he was saying, for example, it is bullying to expect a woman to have to cover her face, and that there is no scriptural basis in the Quran for doing so, for covering your face. Perhaps, I mean, do you mind if I ask you very bluntly why you like to wear what you wear on a daily basis?
I think it's bullying, first of all, for a white middle-aged man to speak on my behalf and say that it's an oppressive symbol without talking to me. In the Quran, it says to lower down the garments, and garments has different interpretation. That's why you see women like me wearing the face veil, other women the headscarf, and other women don't wear it at all. So there's a diversity of views within the text which enable women to express their faith the way they want to. My main reason of wearing it is definitely an act of worship. It's an act of devotion. It is also part of my identity. I am proudly Welsh and unapologetically Muslim.
And you've, as I understand it, you've been wearing it for a long time.
Yes, indeed.
But since you were still at school.
Since I was 14 years old, so I wasn't politicized or anything, as is suggested. It's just my practice of faith.
Of course. And do you, I mean, would you want your, I don't know whether you have children, but would you want your daughters to follow your example? Would you want your nieces, your cousins to follow your example?
I want my children to be proud within their identity, whatever journey or route they take.
You would say, if Boris Johnson was sitting next to you now, you would say, I choose to wear this of my own volition.
I chose to wear this out of my own choice.
And if he doesn't apologise, as lots of people in his party are asking him to do, what will be the impact of that finally, do you think?
I am really hoping that Boris Johnson apologises for his comment. Jack Straw made a similar comment back in 2006 and he apologised for it. I think Boris Johnson is trying to seek attention and increase his political scoring in the expenses of Muslim veiled women, and he has to apologise, otherwise women in the street will not feel safe anymore in Britain.
So interesting to talk to you. I wish we could talk even longer, but it's good of you to join us. Thanks very much indeed for going into our Cardiff studio there. That's Sahar Al-Faifi. Let's head to New York and talk to someone who is a British-American Muslim. Very good to talk to you. Contra Ahmed, who was born in the UK but now lives in the US, where you work as a doctor and you're a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much for your time. I'll start in the same place. What did you think when you heard what Boris Johnson had written?
Certainly the comments were intriguing, and some could interpret it as insensitive. I was surprised that he was actually opposed to the niqab ban in the UK. As a believing Muslim who practices Islam, I partially agree with the geneticist. The Quran actually says not lower your garments, as the geneticist said, but lower your gaze. That is what veiling is about, the demeanour. It's applicable to men and women. There is no mandate about covering the visage or the face. And in fact, this rise in facial covering is something that we're seeing increasingly in the West, while women in other parts of the Muslim world are decreasing that observation, as we can see very emphatically in Saudi Arabia.
So why do you think that is? Why is that?
Because this is a restrictive practice on many women who do not have the choice that the former guest had, who are imposed in these garments before they reach puberty. Veiling does not even apply to the Muslim until the age of sexual maturity. And you see me, and you said in the introduction, I don't veil. But but I am veiled in the context of Islam. I'm covered from the throat to the wrist to the ankles. This is veiling, and my behavior is accordingly. So Boris Johnson, number one, should not apologize. Number two, I'd love the chance to sit down and talk to him about why the niqab is not appropriate for a democratic, secular, liberal democracy. One of the duties that Muslims rarely speak about is we not only have rights to God, but rights to our duty to society. And when we live in Western societies, we are compelled to bring unity, not division. Notice that Muslim countries themselves, the remark about the bank robbers or criminalizing, Muslim countries have outlawed the factories that produce the fabric that generate niqabs and burqa, as in Morocco. In Pakistan, Muslim countries are fighting terrorists that come in disguised in face veils as women. So this is not a benign issue. And my concern as a British and an American Muslim with Islam in the post-9/11 era is that we do as much to communicate about the principles of our faith and not to divide and alienate. For someone to claim that there is Islamophobia and marginalization, victimization of British Muslim women or American Muslim women, I find this abhorrent, because the United States and the United Kingdom give Muslim women greater civil liberties, greater public space, greater opportunities, fiscal independence, sexual reproductive independence, rights that Muslim majority countries deny Muslim women, even though Islam gives us this rights from 14 or 1500 years ago.
OK, I mean, there's an enormous amount in what you're saying there, and there's a lot to unpack. Just to take it to the personal, what about, for example, our previous guest who said she is really genuinely concerned that this will lead to an increase in hate crime? She said things have been bad since the referendum and this can make it worse.
So let me respond. I have concerns about that too. And I condemn that as well in my writing. But I do not see that as Islamophobia. I see that as xenophobia. The entire concept of Islamophobia is one that is new. It really hasn't been around since it became popularized in 1979, post-revolutionary Iran. And it is used to screen Islamism, political Islam, from scrutiny. So when the members of Boris Johnson's party are asking him to apologize, and this is dehumanizing or objectifying Muslim women, the Muslim women are being dehumanized and objectified by distorted interpretations of Islam that Islam never mandated upon womanhood. This is the kernel of the debate, not whether you call somebody a letterbox or a bank robber, which are crass, casual terms. That's not the scandal. The scandal is that the niqab is now being defended by those that believe that they are liberal intellectuals, and that is preferring and allowing Islamist garments and ideologies to become the dominant discourse of Islam, silencing civil and pluralistic Islam in the process. Islam is much more than what one wears. It's about one's conduct. And in the West, Muslims indeed are under more scrutiny, but we have greater responsibility. We want to build united, peaceful, successful societies where we can contribute. Wearing a niqab does not promote social integration and the integration of a unified society. I have no objection against the hijab, and I found it appalling when France brought in laws about the burkini and stripped a woman of the burkini. That's also obscene. But we need to reason, and so I hope that Mr. Johnson does not capitulate to these hysterical demands of an apology.
So interesting to hear your perspective as well. Thank you very much. A very big thank you to both my guests. Conta Ahmed, thank you very much. There is so much more we could discuss, and I am conscious people watching may indeed feel there is an awful lot more to be asked, as indeed there is, but very interesting to hear those perspectives. I'm afraid we must move on to the rest of the day's news. And let's turn our attention to the commemorations in northern France today, because the Duke of Cambridge has been paying tribute to the Allied forces who fought in the Battle of Amiens 100 years ago. He's been speaking at a service at the city's cathedral to mark the centenary of the battle. The fighting heralded a string of Allied victories that led to the end of the First World War. This report from Catherine Stancheshen.
The beginning of the end. On August the 8th, 1918, at first light, forces from Britain, Australia, France, Canada and the US took the Germans by surprise. The Battle of Amiens started a chain of victories that led to Germany's surrender and armistice.
They were young as we are young, They served, giving freely of themselves.
Today, 2,000 people, including the Duke of Cambridge and the Prime Minister, gathered in the stunning setting of Amiens Cathedral to commemorate what was to be the Great War's turning point.
Today, we return to learn more about the experience of those involved during the historic summer of 1918, to honour the fallen of all nations, to commemorate all those who participated in this great endeavour, and to celebrate the bonds of friendship which unite our nations.
The story of Amiens was told with music and with first-hand testimony from letters and diaries.
The morning of 8th August started very foggy indeed. And as our barrage opened, a tremendous barrage, we were wondering how we were going to get on.
The Americans swept everything before them, and the German resistance collapsed. So precipitate was the retreat of the enemy that a German battalion commander fled from his dugout, abandoning his orders, map, and telephone switchboard.
The tanks, which were faster than hitherto, had surprised divisional staff in the headquarters and torn up the telephone lines which communicated with the battlefront.
More than 1,000 people gathered outside, some clutching letters and photos, each telling its own story. The four-day battle was the start of what became known as the 100 Days Offensive, in which German commanders ceded many miles and many men and realised it was a war they couldn't win. Today, Theresa May recalled the words of the Prime Minister at the time, Lloyd George.
More finally even than by the French counter-offensive of July the 18th, were the Germans driven by the British stroke of August the 8th to realise that all hope of victory had passed.
The Battle of Amiens is credited with shortening the First World War. Tributes were left in this cathedral a century ago. Today, it was again a place to honour a crucial moment on the path to peace. Catherine Stancheshin, BBC News.
Well, let's go to Amiens Cathedral now and speak to Helen Patton, who is the granddaughter of General Patton, the World War II general who played a crucial role in the liberation of Europe. A very, very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on the BBC, and your thoughts at the end of, from what everything I saw from London, a very beautiful service. Your thoughts about today?
Well, I think you or your narrator really gave the perfect segue, because we were all today on a path to peace. And this path obviously began a long time ago, 100 years in the story that we are communicating today. But the feeling I had was that this path